Hey guys, this is Richard here with the Gaming Gym, and I am extremely excited. This is a board game video, and I'm going to share with you King of Tokyo. It's my favorite game. It's the best game I have on my shelf. I have probably maybe a little over 100 games, and I've played a good 2 to 3 dozen more beyond that at various game stores or at friends' houses and whatnot. And I'm proud of being a board gamer. I've got my board games on my shelf on display in my living room. And when I have people come over, friends, maybe they're non-gamers or at least certainly not as into it as I am, you know, I'm often asked, what's the best game? What's the best game I have on my shelf? And I always come back to King of Tokyo, designed by Richard Garfield and ELO Games. And, you know, it's not even so much being a fan of Richard Garfield. Richard Garfield, most known for probably Magic the Gathering. And I believe he's the first and original designer for Netrunner. He's created Robo Rally. Brilliant designer. But when I purchased it, I wasn't even aware. And coming from someone that's in old school for probably the better part of a decade during the alpha and beta, playing among the entire Southwest, playing in Pro Tour qualifiers, you know, as a competitive Magic the Gathering, you know, semi-competitive Magic the Gathering player, I'm a huge fan of Richard Garfield. But I wasn't aware that he was the designer of it. And what drew me to it, and what drew me to board games in the first place, was I'm also an old school, you know, Dungeons & Dragons player. I played, and still consistently do, I played numerous games this year. Been playing Dungeons & Dragons and tabletop role-playing for a little over 30 years. And I started video gaming in Atari 2600 days, you know, back before even the Commodore 64. And I have a Bachelor of Arts in Game Art and Design, and I've been to E3, the Electronic Entertainment Expo, 6 times. And that's for an entirely different video where I can talk about my journey towards wanting to be in the game industry and my push towards that. But I know games, you know, on a video game level and the behind the scenes of it and the magic behind it. And I've studied it, and I've obsessed about video games and the companies and the designers. And where does that tie into board games and King of Tokyo specifically is there was a time, you know, a few years ago where I'd be playing my games, and I still play them extensively, you know, maybe on an MMO or something like that, and the kids are at home doing their own thing, and we're all off on the weekend, and maybe the wife, you know, my wife is watching her favorite TV show, and video gaming started to feel kind of isolated, where we were all spending time doing our fun stuff, our leisure activity, but we weren't together. So I started looking at, and I was already a fan of Dark Heresy and the Death Watch stuff with Fantasy Flight. So I started looking into board games, and I found the living card games that they create. And among the highest ranked in the family list, because I wanted to bring the family together, to do the things that we enjoy and the fun stuff, but do it together, sitting face to face, you know, or sitting across from each other. And I found the list on Board Game Geek of top family games, and King of Tokyo was one of the first I purchased, and I was completely blown away. You know, it's at its core, it's a dice game. It's Yahtzee style. The dice are huge. They have amazing symbols, you know, easily readable. They do very simple things, but yet there's a bunch of cards in the game that give a great deal of replayability and a great deal of depth to the game and strategy, and filling that kind of old school Magic the Gathering itch of they can be comboed together to do really cool things. And that depth, again, with my competitive nature coming from Magic and playing those board games the way I do, where I try and be efficient with my turns and maximize my turns, it has a layer of depth to it. But yet, maybe my wife isn't as adventurous as I am in board games, and she doesn't want to find that after a 3-4 hour game, which she will play. She will play 8 to 10 hours of a weekend with me in board games. And she will play, a couple of months ago, a 4-hour game of Witcher 3. This game plays in 20 to 30 minutes. You know, and she likes that, whether she wants to get onto something else, and maybe it's even another board game. And she's ready to, you know, kind of get warmed up as the filler and now get into some, you know, a little more meaty games. It's nice for her, you know, to play that quicker game so that she doesn't find out 3 hours in that she didn't really enjoy it. And it fills, you know, the need that I have, where I like the competitiveness of it, and yet it's just obvious, just simply fun. But yet the fact that you're rolling dice gives my daughter, who is very intelligent, and she's 11, and she can strategize and come up with the combos. But just the fact that we can all plan the best we want, but if my daughter rolls more claws and ends up beating us all up, she wins the game. So it has that kid appeal to it as well. And then my son, who's now 16, he grew up, as most kids, love dinosaurs. And then he started to love monsters. And seeing the standees, which can easily have been any other component, because all they represent is, this is who your monster is, move them either onto the board to show you're in the city of Tokyo, or move them off the board. That's all they're for. That could have been handled with any component. It could have been handled with a token or a sheet or a card. Instead, he sees it as this Godzilla type game, and that appeals to him. And it just is the top of all of our lists, and that's what it's all about. I wanted to board game to get my family first and foremost to the table. Now obviously that's grown and graduated onto, I've got my gaming group and my family still plays. But I wanted to bring us all together and to find a game that kind of hits all those angles and plays so quickly but has that depth and is just so much fun. I mean, that's the #1 review I saw on it when I was, in the process of doing what I hope to do, which is just show you what it's about, introduce you to games, and maybe pull you over to the fence, pull you over the fence and let you decide whether it's a fit for you or not. It just mentioned how much fun the game was, how much fun it is it's Godzilla and it's all that, but it's not. Instead, it's Gigazor and it's a cybernetic bunny and it's a mecha dragon, and it's just, if you know anything about me and my fitness journey and everything that I'm about with that, I'm the Gorilla Jim, and it's got the king in it, who's a King Kong looking guy, and it's a brilliant game. It's so much fun. It plays quickly. So, with that being said, let me just get over to the table. Let me show you what it's about. King of Tokyo, a 2 to 6 player dice game, Yahtzee style. King Kong, Godzilla, cybernetic bunnies and krakens attacking Tokyo. Who gets the most points? Or who's the last monster standing? Let's take a look over at the table. All right, folks, here we are at the table with King of Tokyo. For the components, each player is going to pick one of the monsters. And the great thing about them is you can just pick whatever you like the most, whatever's the coolest. There's not going to be any advantage or disadvantage from picking one to the next. They're all the same. So you have the King, Gigazor, Alienoid, Mecha Dragon, the Kraken, and Cyber Bunny. Okay? And when you pick those, you'll also take the respective sort of player card. So in this 2-player game that I have set up, we have Cyber Bunny and the King. So we would each have the Cyber Bunnies and the King's cards. And what you do on these cards is you set their health, which is the hearts down here, to 10. You can go up to 11 and 12, but only cards will let you to go beyond maximum. And through the course of the game, you can take damage. And by rolling hearts on the dice, you can heal that damage. So obviously, you just change this accordingly. But every monster starts at 10. Again, they're all going to be the same as what they start with. And then you have your points up here in the corner, and those start at 0, and they go up to 20. The first monster to reach 20 points wins the game immediately. Or if you're the last monster standing, so maybe you decide to go the route of just doing as much damage to the monsters as possible. And if you reduce every monster to 0, then they're dead. And it is a player elimination game when you're at 0. Without having a card, which you'll see as I kind of reference them, I'm not going to go over every card because all of these cards, I believe this whole stack is different. There's no duplicates. So there's a ton of variety and replayability, but it adds just so much theme, flavor, and essentially just coolness to the game. And the cards let you kind of break some of the basic rules of the game, and normal rules of the game say you can only attack certain monsters. The cards let you attack anyone. And there's a card that allows you when you're dead to sort of reset your victory points and go back to 10 and come back alive, basically. It's like having a child is what it's called, something like that. So, but otherwise, if you're reduced to 0, you're eliminated. But, that person can, use the restroom, make some food or something, get some food. And by the time they come back, since the game only plays in about 20, 30 minutes, it's really not much of an issue. Everyone's ready to start another game anyway. So everyone's going to get these cards, and this is just to track your win conditions, which is either first to 20 points or eliminate all other monsters. And you keep these cards, just nearby, and all the monsters come off the board. The board is really simple. It has a few little reminders of what to do when you're a monster on the board. In a 2 to 4 player game, you only use Tokyo. In a 5 to 6 player game, Tokyo Bay opens up. And all these really represent is which monsters are in Tokyo. And in this game, for example, a 2-player game or 3 or 4, only Tokyo is available. So, and actually, let me just pretend I'm setting up for a 4-player game with Gigazor, Cyber Bunny, the King, and Mecha Dragon, okay? If the King is in Tokyo, and I'll explain obviously in the rules how he gets into Tokyo. If the King is in Tokyo, the monsters that are all outside of Tokyo, which is every other monster, when they attack on their turns, on that player's turn, they can only attack the monster that's inside of Tokyo. And the monster that's inside of Tokyo, when he deals damage, so when the King deals damage, which comes by rolling claws, the King, the monster in Tokyo, only deals damage to every monster, all of them, to every monster outside of Tokyo. So if it was a 5 or 6 player game and Alienoid happened to be inside of Tokyo Bay as well, then the monsters outside, in this case these 4 on the outside, would deal damage to these 2 monsters, and these 2 monsters would only be dealing damage to the monsters outside. The monsters outside, without cards, again, cannot deal damage to each other, and the monsters inside, if it happened to be a large enough game to unlock both, cannot deal damage to each other likewise. Okay, obviously here, the King has no one else in the city, so he's only dealing damage to all the monsters outside the city. Okay, that's really the main thing that the board's going to signify is who can deal damage to each other, which is what's going to affect that win condition possibly of who's killing who. Okay, the benefit for being in Tokyo is that's how you can gain continuous victory points. At the start of every one of your turns, if the turn comes around to you, and it basically just goes in kind of a clockwise order, if the turn comes around to you and at the start of your turn, your monster is inside the city, either in Tokyo or both, you automatically get 2 victory points. Okay? And remember, 20 wins the game. The dice and cards will also give you other means to gain victory points. Whereas the monsters outside of Tokyo, the only way they're getting victory points is by numbers on the dice, what they roll, and cards. They don't get that continuous. Okay? That's the benefit of being in Tokyo, is you at the start of your turn. So you've got to make it around a full turn in order to, when it comes to you, you've got to be in Tokyo at the start of your turn and you'll get those points. The penalty is, obviously, all monsters from the outside are attacking you, but most importantly, as I kind of mentioned, hearts heal you. You're not allowed to heal when you're in Tokyo. Okay, and that's what this is for, this kind of old school no smoking symbol, right? You're not allowed to heal when you're in Tokyo. So you're going to have to figure out, when's the best time to leave the city, which means you're not getting that those consistent points every round, but you want to leave the city so that, number one, all the monsters are now attacking someone else and not you. Again, barring cards. Cards really change the flow of the whole game. But they also may never come out. I've never gone through any game. The game plays so fast that I've never gone through all of them. And it's not like there's 10 copies of each. So number one is all the monsters are now not attacking you if you're badly wounded, but also on your turn when you do resolve and roll some hearts, you can actually heal those wounds this time. Okay? So that's all really the board's for. It's the most important part, but as I kind of mentioned in the intro, there could have easily been a token that you just flip one side or the other that says whether you're in the city or out, but they gave you these awesome standees, so on the table it just looks like this awesome fight. And then the board is just so simple. It's so tiny, well made, has some cool artwork on it, and this just represents who's in the city and who's out of the city. You have the cards, which I've kind of talked about a little bit, and the way the cards work are there's always 3 face up. You shuffle the deck and you reveal 3. At the end of your turn, anytime you've resolved the dice with a lightning bolt on it, that's energy, which are represented by these cubes, these components. And you can save them up. So if I keep 5 of these at the end of my turn, I would get 5 energy, and maybe there's nothing I want to buy or I don't have enough yet, and I save up. You can continue saving up energy. That you spend that energy at the end of your turn to pay for that cost based on what's on the top left. So this would cost 4, 4, and 3. So if I have 7 energy, I can maybe buy this one and this one. Or I can buy this, and cards that are purchased replace immediately. I can see what's next and then decide that I want to buy this one as well. Okay? The other thing you can do, which is a little bit of strategy and kind of, against your opponents is I can spend 2 energy at any time to wipe the board and discard them completely, redraw 3 new ones, and maybe there's something new that I can now purchase or want. The other big part with that, though, is if I'm saving up energy, and some of the best cards are usually going to be costly, like 7 or 6 or 8 or something, 6 to 8 points of energy, is if I can't afford them, but I don't want my opponent, who's maybe hoarding these energy, I can spend 2 to wipe it, so it's now in the discard pile, and they're not going to be able to purchase that card. So that's kind of like a, in the Magic terms, the old school, which fitting because it's Richard Garfield game. That's kind of the hate drafting component to it. Okay, so that's how these work. These are just simply energy which you get through dice. I'll explain the dice in better detail in a moment. You've got your standees, as I mentioned. You pick your guy. You set it to 10 and 0. You've got your cards. There are 2 types of cards in the game. There are discard cards and keep cards. Discard cards are very simple. You purchase them with energy, and then you immediately discard them to the discard pile, and you resolve what they do, which is very simply you're going to get 2 victory points for that. Okay? Keeps have abilities on them, either passive abilities that trigger under certain conditions, or things that you have to pay for, or maybe you use energy to also have to trigger them, or whatever it may be, or maybe it's responding to triggers based on what you roll. And keep stay in front of you, and you can build up these little combinations of just what they are, combinations. And you can build up as many of these as you want, and you keep them in front of you with their effects active for the remainder of the game, until, of course, there are certain cards in the game that would allow players to steal those cards from you. But otherwise, you just keep them. Okay, so those are the cards. You've got your standees. Finally, most important, you have the dice. There are 6 dice in the game, and they're all the same, and they have one side on each is completely different. You've also got these 2 extra dice. Okay, and these are just what they sound like. They're extra dice. They only come into play. There's a card like in here called Extra Head, which allows the play. It's a keep card. So when they acquire it, they keep that in front of them, and for the remainder of the game, while they have that card, they get an extra dice to roll. So instead of rolling only 6 dice in the game, you get 7 dice. That's a huge benefit. So that's the one where if you don't have enough to purchase it, but it's up here in the lineup, you may want to spend that 2 to wipe it so that no other player can get it on their turn. But otherwise, without those cards coming up, these dice will never come into play. But they're the exact same as the black dice. Okay, so you have the 6 dice, and this is basically the meat and potatoes of the game. You roll them Yahtzee style. You get 3 rolls total, resolving the dice at the end of that 3rd and final roll, and that's going to dictate what your options are for the turn. Okay, so next I'm going to go ahead and explain and go into what the dice are. All right, so getting into the dice, let me show you how they work. Now, before going into that very briefly, once again, I'm going to kind of reference those cards. And I know I keep talking about them without obviously going over each of them, but they really just add the variety to the game. There's so much flavor. I mean, if you really look on the table, there's not a lot of components. You've got dice, and they're all the same. You have a little board, which just signifies who's in Tokyo and who's out. You've got these energy tokens. So when you gain energy, you keep these as your currency. And then you just have your pieces, of which monster are you, and your score tracker, basically, of whether you're close to winning the game and how much health are you at. Now, the components I didn't mention, which do reference the cards, are these here. There's a bunch more than these, and there's also a much larger supply of energy here that are still in the box. These just reference certain cards. There's a card that maybe puts poison counters on a monster, which does some kind of an effect. So it's just really neat that they gave you these little tokens specific to those cards, and the artwork is identical. So it's almost like someone just took the zoomed in version of this card. So that's all these tokens are for. They may never come into play, obviously, if those cards are never acquired. But the reason why I keep referencing the cards is when I talk about the dice, obviously the cards are going to possibly break those rules. And that's really what the cards do, and that's where the variety and the spice of the whole game comes into play. Because if you think about it, the dice, and I'll go into the details of them right now in a moment, the dice have numbers on them, which is how you can get points. 20 points wins the game. Other than that, there's claws, which is how you deal damage to other monsters. If you kill all the other monsters, you win the game that way. And hearts, which is how you keep yourself from getting killed. So the only other result possible is the one that has nothing to do with an immediate win condition, which is points or dying and surviving. Yet, it's the energy which gives you the buying power to get these cards, which have so much effect on the game because they let you literally break and violate all the base rules. So, you know, it's going to go without saying basically any further. When I explain the dice, know that when I say that this is the only option you have or this is how it works, there are cards that will obviously change that. But just the depth and the strategy in having that mechanic of, do you want to acquire cards, which can really give you an engine of just amazing options and things that are not normally allowed by any other player, but yet you're investing dice into that aren't directly affecting whether you survive, kill another monster, or get points. So it's a really interesting, you know, and tons of replayability, and they're just so much fun. If you read them and you really look at the title and what the image is and what they do, it really fits thematically. It's just outstanding. So here's what the dice are. What you're going to do is, you know, obviously in turn order, when it's a player's turn, you grab all 6 dice and you roll them. From this roll, I get to set aside any dice I want, as many as I want. I can simply say, I like that roll, I'm done. I resolve each of those dice together separately, and then I'm done, and I pass the dice to the next player, and they take their turn. That's it. That's your turn. But assume I don't want to keep this roll as is. I'll just keep the claw, and I'll explain what they'll do in a minute, but I'll keep the claw and the energy. And then I'll roll my second roll, and I roll these. And now, look, there's a bunch of numbers. Those are good, and you want a bunch of the same number. Now, that made me think, maybe I want, you know, so maybe here on my second roll, I'm good. I stop right there. I'll resolve this, and resolve that. Okay? But maybe I know I still have a third roll left. Maybe I don't want to keep these any longer. And when you set aside dice, they're not locked in. You know, they're not permanently, you can't change your mind. Is now that I rolled this and I noticed that I'm kind of heading this direction, I want to re-roll these now and maybe get another chance to get some more ones. And in this case, I didn't. So at my third and final roll, you keep what there is. That's it. You know, I have to take these. Now, that's important that it's only on the third and final roll because you don't get things immediately. So for instance, if I roll the energy, which is how I get cubes, on my first roll, I only decide to set this aside, I don't get that energy immediately. And the reason for that is if I decide to roll later, and now on a second turn I roll that, and I keep the claws, I still don't get any of this yet. I don't resolve it till your third and final roll. On my third roll, or on my second roll I should say, I noticed I got these claws. I don't want to keep the energy anymore. I want to go for more claws now. That kind of made me change my mind. I bring this back in and I roll that. Well, I did get another claw, but now I didn't get that energy back, so I never would have gotten that energy. You only get to resolve what you end your third and final roll with, okay? So that's the way rolling works, is I roll 3 times total, keeping any number of dice, mix and matching them, you know, deciding to keep some, hold some back, whatever. That's how that works, okay? Now let me explain what the dice are. They're all the same. There's 6 sides, and all sides are different. Okay, I've already kind of, you know, mentioned a lot of them. So you've got 3 numbers, a 1, 2, and 3, and then you have a heart, a claw, and a energy. So very simply, energy, all the ones that you keep at the end of your third and final turn, for each one energy you have, you keep 1 energy cube. And you can use those immediately, as I said, spend 2 to wipe the board, or spend the number to purchase them. When you purchase, they go away, or you purchase them and either discard them if it's a discard effect, or keep them in front of you, but it replaces immediately. And as long as you have enough energy cubes, you can continue spending. Okay, only on your turn. So that's what energy does. It gives you the currency. Claws, let's go hearts. Hearts let you heal. Only when you're outside of Tokyo can you heal. For each heart you have, you heal that many wounds. If I'm at 6 life, I roll 3 hearts, I go up to 9. Okay? Claws deal damage, and this is how damage works. In the beginning of the game, all monsters are outside of Tokyo. The first player to roll and keep a claw. So again, if I roll a claw on my first roll, but I don't on the second, I don't want to keep it, and I re-roll it, and on my third roll, I didn't roll a claw, then I resolve those dice, I pass them on to the next player, but I didn't go into Tokyo. The first monster to end their turn with at least 1 claw is the first monster to go into Tokyo. And again, in a 5 to 6 player game, if Tokyo is occupied, Tokyo Bay becomes available. Okay, but let's just assume for a 3-4 player game. So that monster enters Tokyo. Meaning, on your very first round, since we're just trying to establish who's going to enter Tokyo first, there's no point in keeping extra claws because you don't deal damage with those claws yet. Okay, we're just trying, because you were not in Tokyo at the start of that turn. So we're just trying to establish getting in. So if you roll any extra claws, re-roll those. Now, if you happen to get stuck with those, then they're just kind of dead. This just means as I have at least one or more claws, I enter Tokyo. The monster that immediately enters Tokyo automatically gains 1 star, 1 victory point. Okay? And then from there on out, anytime a monster keeps claws at the end of their 3 rolls, they deal 1 damage per claw to the monster. If you're outside, you deal damage to the monster inside of Tokyo. So Cyber Bunny on the outside, at the end, that's his roll. He rolls 3 damage. He deals 3 damage to the king. The king would go from 9 to 6. If he kills the king, then he kills the king. You don't get any victory points or bonuses for that. He's just 1 player less having to, oh, he's killed 1 player and he has less players left in the game to possibly win. If the king had rolled these 3, this was his final roll, the king would deal 3 damage to every monster outside of the city. All of them, Mecha Dragon, Gigazor, Cyber Bunny, would all take 3 damage. Okay, that's the way the king deals damage. Remember, as the king is taking damage, he can't roll hearts. He can, but they don't resolve as anything. So obviously re-roll them. If you're stuck with a bunch of hearts on your 3rd roll, that does nothing for you. Since the king can't heal, the way entering and leaving Tokyo works from there is based on damage. Once a monster's in Tokyo, they're not allowed to willingly leave on their own. A monster such as Cyber Bunny that deals damage, so Cyber Bunny deals 3 damage, Gigazor takes nothing, Mecha Dragon takes nothing because they're outside of Tokyo with him. That 3 damage goes to the king. As I said, he moves from 9 to 6. Since he took damage, he now has to wait. Maybe Gigazor's next, and then Mecha Dragon's next. And if they resolve any damage, they're going to keep doing that damage to him. So he's getting scared because he doesn't think, although he'd want to stay in to try and get those 2 victory points at the beginning of his turn and continue doing that, he leaves Tokyo. Anytime a monster in Tokyo or Tokyo Bay takes damage, they can choose to leave. They still take that damage, but they choose to leave. And they leave for that simple reason, as I mentioned early in the instruction, of by leaving, any monsters now dealing damage aren't going to deal damage to him anymore because he's outside with them. And when he leaves, the monster that dealt damage to him, in this case Cyber Bunny dealt the 3, Cyber Bunny would immediately move in, would get the 1 victory point for entering Tokyo for the first time, and now Cyber Bunny's in Tokyo, which means Gigazor then goes and damage he deals is now going to be dealt to Cyber Bunny. Mecha Dragon's going to deal damage to Cyber Bunny, and the king, who's avoided the damage from those 2 because he's now outside the city, when he rolls hearts, he can now start to heal up again. But then if it makes it around to Cyber Bunny's going to get that 2-point bonus. So that's the give and take back and forth of who enters Tokyo and who's out. Once you're in, and that's established by the first monster to roll at least 1 or more claws goes in first, that you kept. Again, just like anything else, you have to keep it. It isn't something that happens the minute you roll it. If it's on my first roll, I have to wait and see whether I'm keeping these claws by my 3rd and final roll to determine whether that monster's taking damage or not. When you first enter, or whenever you enter Tokyo, you get the 1 victory point. If you make it around a full turn, you'll get 2 victory points. And whenever a monster deals damage to the monsters on the outside all deal damage to a monster inside. The monster inside of Tokyo has to take that damage, but then they can choose to immediately leave, which automatically puts the monster that dealt the damage in. And the game continues on until a monster either reaches 20 points or there's the last monster standing. So with that, how do you get some points? That's the last 3 on the dice. The last 3 faces are the 1, 2, and 3. They only apply if you get 3 of the same number. So if I finish with this, I would get 1 energy. These would do nothing. And since I have 3 3s, I would get 3 victory points. If I had 3 2s, I would get 2 victory points. If I had 4 2s, any additional of the same number is +1. So if this was what I got, I would get 1 energy cube. The 1 would do nothing. I would get 2 points for those set of 3, and 1 more for an additional, for a total of 3 points there. Okay? If I rolled all 1s, 6 1s, obviously unlikely, but I rolled 6 1s, that would be 1 point for the first 3, and then an additional 1, 2, and 3 for a total of 4 points. So this would be 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, 4 points. If on roll number 2 I'm gambling and I'm trying to get that third 3 and I roll, and that's what I get, I would heal for 3 unless I'm in Tokyo, This does nothing, and I never got the third 3, so this would be dead, and I get nothing for that as well. So all I would get if I'm out of Tokyo is heal for 3. Again, without a special card that lets you go beyond max, if I'm already at 10 or I'm at 9, healing for 3 is only going to put me back up to max. So that's not a very efficient roll. That's how the numbers work. They give you the points. 20 points wins. The claws and the hearts either hurt monsters or heal you of wounds as long as you're not in Tokyo. And the energy gives you the currency needed to buy cards and maybe power some cards. Again, you continue until last monster standing or first to 20. Pick some new monsters maybe and do it all again. That's it. There's King of Tokyo, folks. Thanks for watching. Take care.